When we think of King David, what usually comes to mind? The young shepherd, the mighty warrior, maybe the poet king. But today, we're going to pull back the curtain on a different David. We're looking at David, the CEO, the master administrator who built one of the most powerful kingdoms of the ancient world. And the crazy part? The blueprint for how he did it has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years. I mean, seriously, think about that question. How do you build a kingdom from the ground up? How do you take a bunch of different tribes, all with their own histories, and forge them into one single, secure, and wealthy nation? It takes more than just being a great warrior. It takes a system. It takes a blueprint. And that blueprint is tucked away in a detailed list from the book of 1 Chronicles. Now, I know what you're thinking. A list sounds boring. But this isn't just a dry list of names. Oh no. It's basically a super detailed organizational chart for David's entire government. And today, we're going to decode it together. So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the foundation of his whole blueprint, the military, specifically his 12-month army. Then, we'll see how he actually governed all the different tribes. After that, we'll dig into the economics, how he managed the kingdom's money. And finally, we'll meet the king's inner circle, his personal brain trust. All right, first things first, security, right? No kingdom can last if it isn't safe. But here's the problem. If you mobilize a huge permanent army, you could totally wreck the economy. So what was David's brilliant solution? He created a rotational army. Think of it like a massive National Guard. Instead of keeping hundreds of thousands of men in the field all year long, he had divisions that served on a schedule. 1 month on, 11 months off. This was genius. It kept the men trained and ready to fight, but it also let them go back to their farms, their families, their jobs for most of the year. What an incredible piece of resource management. And just think about the sheer scale of this thing. Each monthly division had 24,000 men. 24,000. That alone is a huge fighting force, ready to be called up at a moment's notice. And he had 12 of these divisions. Yep, one for every single month of the year. This meant the kingdom was never, ever left vulnerable. It was in a constant state of readiness, just rotating like clockwork. So you do the math, and the number is just staggering. David could call on a total trained force of 288,000 men. For that time in history, this was a colossal army, all run through this unbelievably efficient rotational system. And of course, it was all perfectly organized. Every single division had its own high-ranking commander, basically a general who was in charge for that month. The names might sound ancient to us, but the structure, a crystal clear chain of command, well, that's absolutely timeless. Okay, so the kingdom's borders are secure thanks to this amazing army. What's the next challenge? The politics. How do you actually govern 12 different and, let's be honest, often rival tribes? David's blueprint has a pretty sophisticated answer for that too. You see, he didn't just have one system for everybody. It was way more nuanced than that. For the regular secular tribes, he appointed civil leaders. But for the priestly tribes, he respected their unique religious role and put priestly leaders in charge. This shows an amazing understanding of a kind of separation of powers, even 3,000 years ago. But then, right in the middle of this list of leaders, the text just drops this bombshell, this really ominous line. It's a sudden reminder that this isn't just a list, it's a story. And this is the exact moment where the king's ambition slams into a higher authority. So what happened? Well, David's top generals started a national census, to count all the people, probably for taxes and military drafts. But he never finished it. The text pretty strongly suggests this was a dangerous power grab by the king. It's this fascinating little detail that reminds us that in David's kingdom, even the king had his limits. So you've got an army, you've got a government, now you've got to pay for it all. So let's look at the kingdom's economic engine. The list of David's managers reads like a modern-day presidential cabinet, with a secretary for pretty much every asset the nation had. Now, to make sense of this really long list of officials, we can break them down into 3 main groups. First, you've got the people managing the money and the storage. Second, the ones overseeing all the valuable crops and produce. And third, the managers of the kingdom's huge herds of livestock. First up, the Treasury Department. There was one guy in charge of the mean royal storehouses, kind of like the nation's treasurer. Then another person was in charge of the logistics for all the warehouses out in the towns and villages. They even had a specific manager just for the people who worked the royal farms. Every single link in the supply chain was covered. And the level of specialization in agriculture is just wow. It wasn't one guy doing everything. One official managed the vineyards, a completely different person managed the wine that came from them. Another guy was in charge of the valuable olive and sycamore trees, and yet another person managed the final supplies of olive oil. Every single step of the process had its own specialist. This incredible attention to detail just keeps going with the livestock. One manager was in charge of the herds in the fertile plains. Another guy, an Ishmaelite, was the expert in charge of the camels. They probably hired him specifically for his expertise. They even had managers just for the donkeys and the flocks. Every single royal asset was being professionally managed. It's amazing. And finally, at the very top of this entire pyramid, you had David's inner circle. This was his command center, his West Wing staff, if you will, the handful of trusted advisors who helped him run the whole show. This was David's brain trust. You had a counselor and scribe for wisdom and keeping records, a tutor for the royal kids, a chief strategist, a close personal friend and confidant, and of course, the powerful commander of the entire army. These were the minds at the very heart of the entire operation. So when you put it all together, the rotational army, the tribal governors, that cabinet of economic managers, and the inner circle, the picture you get is just extraordinary. This wasn't a kingdom held together just by one charismatic guy. It was built on a durable, detailed, and honestly, a surprisingly modern system of organization. And that kind of leaves us with one last thought to chew on. This 3,000-year-old org chart shows us that the basic challenges of leadership, security, unity, managing the economy, and having wise counsel, they really are timeless. It really makes you wonder, what can this ancient blueprint teach us about how power is still structured today?